In 2001, the United States military invaded Afghanistan. 20 years later, the US is withdrawing and the Taliban appears to be stronger than ever, with control of up to 85% of the country. In 1979, the Soviet Union also invaded Afghanistan, and after 9 years, they also withdrew and the regime they fought so hard to prop up almost immediately collapsed. And before them, the British Empire invaded Afghanistan on 3 separate occasions and failed to conquer them in each instance. Today, Afghanistan has a smaller population than California in a territory that's only a little larger than France. So how is it that a country of this small size was capable of resisting 3 of the world's most powerful? There's a lot of answers to that question, but let's start with the easiest to understand and perhaps the most obvious: geography. In reality, Afghanistan is little more than a geographical expression. All of her borders were arbitrarily drawn up by outside foreign powers more than a century ago. Its small population is composed of a loose association of 14 different ethno-linguistic groups and numerous more tribes, many of which, like the Uzbeks, Tajiks, and Pashtuns, straddle the country's borders. Artificial boundaries set up by Westerners hundreds of years ago that mean very little to them. The Pashtuns make up nearly half of Afghanistan's population today, but 2/3 of all Pashtuns live next door in neighboring Pakistan and are a minority group there. The border between Afghanistan and Pakistan runs directly through the Pashtun tribal area and divides the 60 million Pashtun people between both countries. Imagine if in Europe, Poland was divided between Germany and Russia, and a wall was built directly between both sides of where the Poles live. Obviously, the Poles would never recognize this border and routinely cross it to visit family and friends. And the Pashtuns largely treat the Afghan-Pakistan border the very same way. The border here is extremely mountainous and rural, so patrolling it from the Pakistani government's perspective has always been quite challenging. This has allowed Pashtun insurgents operating within Afghanistan the valuable ability to easily escape across the border into the friendly Pashtun areas of Pakistan, regroup and recover, recruit more men, and then travel back into Afghanistan freshly supplied and ready for more combat. Neither the Afghan border nor the Taliban recognize this border as legitimate, and there are at least 235 known crossing points across the border and through the mountains between both countries. Militants, drugs, money, and supplies can easily be smuggled into Afghanistan by way of Pakistan, and it's made all the easier by many of the Pashtuns of Pakistan being more sympathetic to the Afghan or Taliban cause. This has led many people to label the Afghan-Pakistan border as the most dangerous border in the entire world. And recently, as a result of all of this, by the end of June 2021, Pakistan has finally finished building a fence across the entire length of the border, specifically to stop all of this, and has restricted border crossings to only 16 legally designated locations. But this is all only the start of what makes Afghanistan an almost impossible place to conquer. I mean, just look at the map. Afghanistan is landlocked, so getting your troops and supplies there requires the cooperation of at least one of the 6 countries that borders it: Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, China, and of course Pakistan. But even once you get across one of these countries and you arrive at Afghanistan's borders, you're going to be met with Afghanistan's monumentally challenging terrain. Despite being in the center of the world's most populous continent, Afghanistan has always been heavily isolated and largely rural and underpopulated because of this: the high peaks of the Hindu Kush mountain range with some of the tallest and biggest mountains found anywhere on the planet. 75% of Afghanistan's territory is considered to be mountainous, and nearly half of our territory has an elevation above 2,000 meters, which makes Afghanistan among the most mountainous countries of the world, and among the most isolated too as a result. These huge mountains act like natural walls in more ways than one. They help to keep invaders out, but they also separate communities within and make transporting supplies across challenging. These are all very difficult factors to overcome from the perspective of any outside invader. There are dozens of valleys that zigzag in between the mountains of Afghanistan where most of the population resides. And since they're surrounded by some of the biggest and most formidable mountains on Earth, it's always been difficult to travel between them, and consequently, they're each sort of their own little world inside of Afghanistan. Over thousands of years, they each ended up developing their own rather distinctive cultures, identities, beliefs, tribes, and rulers, and thus, there's very little sense of Afghan nationhood, and Afghan patriotism has never been a particularly strong motivating factor. Because of all these separate and rural communities that are difficult to travel between, the grip of any central government has always been weak and intermittent, while the valleys have largely governed themselves autonomously, especially in the countryside. Any semblance of Afghan national unity has always been a direct consequence of foreign powers invading and attempting to impose their rule over the whole. Like with the British, Soviets, and recently Americans, the ruler in the capital city Kabul may nominally wield de jure authority over the entire realm, like the Holy Roman Emperor, but is not able to wield de facto authority over all of the various princes, valleys, tribes, and clans, just like the Holy Roman Emperor. Any invader coming in to occupy Afghanistan will struggle with all of the same issues that a domestic ruler will. Afghanistan's geography is not very conducive to a centralized authority, and neither is Afghanistan's infrastructure. Years before all of this war, the Afghan government had attempted to build a circular highway that would connect all of their major economic centers together. But over the decades of civil war and Soviet intervention, the highway was in very bad shape. By the time the United States invaded in 2001, there were only a mere 50 kilometers of paved roads to speak of in the entire country. For comparison, France has 1.1 million kilometers of paved roads in a smaller and significantly less mountainous territory. The lack of good roads only made the disparate valleys and communities of the Afghan interior even more isolated from each other, and it made transporting troops and supplies a logistical nightmare for the Americans and the Soviets before them, none of which helped at all for the country's stability. As with all things in Afghanistan, the development of new roads is difficult and expensive because of the harsh mountainous terrain, the cold winter weather that often chews roads up, and sabotage from the Taliban and other insurgents. Building or repairing roads in the country necessitates hiring security and necessitates building them across harsh geography and climates, which means that it can get incredibly expensive, as much as $5 million per mile in some locations. And this is all in a country where the average person only makes a little over $500 a year, one of the poorest and least developed nations on the planet. The construction of a single mile of road within Afghanistan is about the combined annual wages of 9,800 Afghanis. Ultimately, Afghanistan is easy to invade and take over, but it's almost impossible to effectively hold it for long. The landscape is huge, with a lot of rural and empty places for insurgents and rebels to hide. Getting troops in and establishing supply lines through massive mountains and narrow passes is challenging and easy for guerrilla combatants to harass and disrupt. The relationship with neighboring Pakistan is complex, and Pashtun insurgents can easily cross the border and regroup without much fear, and then return to fight in Afghanistan whenever ready. The flow of insurgent supplies, money, and manpower across the border is difficult to stop through the hundreds of high and remote mountain passes, and requires the cooperation of Pakistan, which she is sometimes willing to give and other times not. Centralized rule is almost impossible to enforce outside of Kabul by way of Afghanistan's geographic reality, and nation building is inherently impossible because even the concept of an Afghan nation among Afghanistan's various ethnicities and tribes is tenuous at best, and certainly radically different from the Western idea of nation-states such as Germany or France. It is one of the most fascinating, violent, and controversial conflicts of both the 20th and 21st century.